Hello everyone, my name is Anvi Shah. Welcome to the 5th Norgard Designs Global Project for International Bead Week titled Honoring the Ndebele. In this video, I will be showing you the Ndebele stitch, which is also known as the herringbone stitch. Before we get started, I would like to thank Sam Norgard and the Beaders Guild for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I would also like to thank all of you for being such an integral part of the Global Project series and for joining us today. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Here we are, ready to begin making our Ndebele ropes. I've made a few examples, like this one, using blue as the dominant color and pops of yellow. I've also used different sizes of beads here, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. Here's another example where I've used green as the dominant color with red accents. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Ndebele stitch to create a beaded rope using size 80 beads. I have two different greens, a dark and a light. I start out by picking up two dark green beads and leaving about a 6-inch tail. I pass my needle through the first dark green bead that I added to make the beads lay side by side next to each other like this. I then pass the needle down through the second bead that I have added. Now I have my thread coming out the bottom of the second bead. So when I add my third bead, I will pass my needle from the top to the bottom of that bead. And that makes the third bead lie in the sequence. I will now pass my needle up through that third bead. And I'm ready to start with the fourth. I pick up the fourth bead, and since my thread is coming out the top of the previous bead, I pass my needle from the bottom to the top of bead 3. And then, to get my thread into working position, I pass the thread from top to bottom of that fourth bead. And as you can see here, the beads begin to lay next to each other in 45-degree angles. I continue adding bead after bead using a similar sequence, making sure that my thread goes from bottom to top or top to bottom, depending on where my working thread is positioned. I create a chain of 8 beads that lie next to each other. If some of you are familiar with the brick stitch, this is also how the first line or the brick stitch ladder is created. I'm just going to add on the last few beads in my first round. And I have about 7 ready here, so I still need one more. I pick up the bead, I pass the needle from the bottom to the top, and then bring my thread back into working position by passing the needle from top to bottom. And as you can see, I have 8 beads all lined up at about a 45-degree angle, and you already see the herringbone formation. I will now connect the last and the first bead together to form a ring. If you did notice, my thread was coming out from the bottom of that 8th bead. So when I went and picked up the first bead again, I passed through from the bottom to the top. I just create a few loops through those 2 beads, the first and the last, to make sure that my ring is secure. I also have the 6-inch tail still on the beadwork, which is important to have. I prefer holding the tail in my palm while I'm beading to maintain tension, but to also make sure that the beadwork doesn't unravel. So there I have the first round or the first ring ready. I then start working with light green beads. I pick up 2 light green beads and pass through the bead right next to the bead that my thread is coming out of. In this stitch, you will be adding beads in pairs. So as you can see, I've added 2 beads. And now I will pass my needle up from bottom to top through the third bead without picking up any beads. I pick up 2 more light green beads and pass through the neighboring dark green bead, which is my fourth bead in the sequence. Sometimes the beads need a little encouragement, so you have to tell them how you would like them to sit on top of the previous beads. I pass my needle from bottom to top through the fifth bead and pick up 2 more light green beads and pass through the neighboring dark green bead, which is my sixth dark green bead. As you can see, the beads begin to stack up on one another. I passed my needle from bottom to top of the 7th bead without picking up any beads, and then take 2 more light green beads and pass down through the 8th bead. So you're done adding all the beads for your second row, but you do have to step up to make sure your thread is in working position to start the third row. So for that, I will pass through the first bead from my previous row, but also the first bead from the second row. So a dark green bead as well as a light green bead, and pull my thread through. Now my thread is ready for me to start working on the third row. Your structure at this point might look a little floppy and you might be uncomfortable with the way that your beadwork is looking. That's normal. Just continue on, and somewhere around row 4 or 5, you'll begin to see the rope structure come together. I'm now starting with 2 dark green beads. I pass through the neighboring light green bead and then take my thread up from bottom to top through the third light green bead. And then I continue adding dark green beads in 2s and passing through the next light green bead without picking up a thread to set up my thread to put the next pair of beads. At this point, you will have to use your fingers to sort of keep the beads in place a little bit because your structure is not fully formed yet, but you're very close. You're getting there. Once you do have that structure in place, you'll see that working with this stitch gets significantly easier. And here I'm doing my step up through the next 2 beads, through the first 2 beads to complete that third row, and I'm ready to start the fourth. So as you can see, I do have to hold it in place a little bit for the rope formation to show, but with this fourth row, it will all come together. So I put the first 2 beads of the fourth row, pass through the third bead of the previous row from bottom to top, pick up 2 light green beads, and pass down through the 4th bead in the row and up through the 5th bead in that previous row. Then I pick up 2 more light green beads and pass my needle down through the dark green bead from the previous row and continue stacking these beads in that herringbone formation. These will be the last 2 light green beads of this 4th round. So I pick up 2, pass through the neighboring dark green bead, adjust the beads to make sure they're sitting the way that I want them to, and then pass my needle up through the first bead from the previous row and the first bead from the 4th row that I just added. And as you can see now, the rope is more together, it's more evident as a rope structure, and the beads are now adjusting by themselves and sitting the way that I want them to. So I'm going to add in the 5th row now, which is a row of dark green beads. And I continue the same way that I have been beading so far. Pick up 2 beads, pass through the adjacent light green bead, and then pass just my thread through the third light green bead before I pick up 2 more to add the pair. I continue the rest of the row using that same stitch and same technique. And there come the last 2 dark green beads for the row. Pass through the light green and do the step up to bring my thread into working position. So I pass through the light green and the dark green. And there you have it, the base structure for the rope. And you can either choose to continue this rope using the 80 beads, or we can also switch it up with some different kinds. I continued on a few more rounds and made my rope a little longer than I previously had it. And now I'm going to add some more rows, but in different sizes. So here I have 6-0 and 2 colors in 11-0 beads, and that's what I'm going to make the rest of my pattern in. So I'm going to start by adding the accents of a shimmery green in the 11-0, and these are all 11-0 rounds that I'm using for this round. And like we've discussed earlier, you place the beads in pairs for the entire round and continue stacking on top of the rope that you've already created. It's relatively easier to place the smaller beads when your rope is made in larger ones, and you'll see that when I get to the 6-0 rounds, they have a little bit of a tough time fitting in the structure, but don't worry, just keep beading, and as you go on, they'll find a place for themselves. So I finished up that row, and then I add the pop of color, which in this case is going to be 11-0 rounds in red. Sam Norgard and Deb Mosh have created a wonderful color video to help guide you through choosing your colors and to help you create a variety of options in the ropes that you make. That video is the one that comes just before this in our learning sequence. So I hope you can find your way there and watch it, and some of you might already have before you made your way to this technique video. Using different scales of the beads like we have here, 6-0, 8-0, and 11-0, creates some very interesting textures in the rope. And I'm really excited for you all to try that, because as the rope gets longer, you have these beautiful undulating patterns that form in them. And you'll see as we go on, and I'll show you some examples towards the end of this video as well. As I finish up this round of red beads, I did want to mention to you all that the 6-inch tail that we had left in the beginning of the beadwork is important to have. We request that you leave that 6-inch tail at the beginning and the end of the beadwork, because that is what will help us connect the ropes together to make the final piece. However, to show you how to add a new thread and tie off so that you can continue beading the 12-inch, anywhere between 6 and 12 inches of the rope, I will show you how to do that later on in this video. So continue on with us and you'll be able to see how that is done. Other than the video instructions on color, which I think is absolutely brilliant, we will also have myself and Carol Gerarty showing you how you can make different kinds of patterns using the beads that you select, And I think that's going to be very interesting as well, because you can play around with the placements of the color, but you can also play around with placements within the scale of the beads. I tend to not go from 11-0 to 6-0 directly, and this is more of a personal choice. I like to gradually move it to the larger beads. So after my row of 11-0, I placed in a row of 8-0, and I'm struggling here with a knot, but I think I got it. There we go. So yes, like I was saying, after I used the 11-0 beads, I give it a buffer of one row using 8-0 beads before I add in the 6-0. I just think it's an easier, smoother transition, and it's something I prefer, but you can absolutely experiment with using 11-0 and then 6-0 directly after if you would prefer a more dramatic effect. So as you can see, the 6-0, they stay in place, but they are a little wobbly as I continue to add them, and they really open up the space of the rope. So I like to hold the thread in my hand to maintain tension with those, because the thread does tend to loosen up quite a bit while you are working. But once you are done with that row of 6-0s and start with the next, it gets better. Now stepping up through the 8-0 followed by the 6-0 bead. And then, like I said again, with the gradual transition, I put in a row of 8-0s. But do you see how dramatic that transition looks with the 11-0, the 8-0s, and then the 6-0s? I think it's a fabulous texture to add. And you can do this in many different ways. I only have one row of each here before I start again with the 8-0s, but you can also have multiple rows of the 6-0s, or you could have the main portion of your rope in 6-0s and only your accents in smaller beads. It's entirely up to you. You could also have your accents in the larger beads. So the possibilities really are endless, and it's up to you all to show your creativity. We do request you all to stay within the range of these three sizes in the round beads, that is 11-0, 8-0, and 6-0. That will make things a lot easier for us when we are combining all of your components together to form the final piece. And another thing to remember, I did mention it earlier, but I am going to reiterate, is this is a rope made of 8 beads. So your initial ring that you create has to be 8 beads. And then you continue building on top of those 8 beads. Here's another accent. I love how it almost looks like little berries on a stem here. Ah, how exciting. And so, as you can see, it doesn't really want to close back up into that rope form, but as I continue to add rows, the thread will come back together. In some cases, you might have a longer stretch of thread, as you can see here, but it will eventually all cinch together. I'm going to continue on for a few more rows so you can see how after using different sizes of the beads, the rope does eventually come together and continue on as you started. And what we request from you all is that your ropes range between 6 inches and 12 inches. That way you can really experiment with color and scale and show us a great deal of variety. That gives enough space to experiment and really have a lot of fun with the structure. I love using Ndebele ropes in my work. I just think they're so varied, and the texture that you create is so beautiful. And so I here would like to continue repeating the pattern. So I'm just gonna keep going with what I have, and I'm going to start repeating the pattern from the very beginning now, so that I have that repetitive form that comes back every inch or so. So as you can see, the beads that didn't really look like they wanted to come back into the rope structure are now slowly falling into place. Sometimes the step up with the 11-0 is a little harder than usual, but with some adjusting with the needle, you can always get there. So that's what my accent motif will end up looking like, and I'm going to continue on further with the 8 zeros. So I continued the 8 zeros for a few more rounds here, so you can see how that pattern repeats. And now I have about 4 inches of thread left, and I'm going to show you how to tie a knot and finish the thread off. So I'm going to start by passing the thread through a few beads, but first going through the adjacent bead and a few more beads in that very row. And now if you see, you can see a small thread bridge. So right next to the bead that my thread is coming out of, there is a bridge, which I will pick up using my needle, and that's where I tie the knot. And when I do tie the knot, I like to pull the knot in towards the bead that my thread was initially coming out of, so that I can't see that knot. So I tie a double knot there and pull that into the bead as well. And as you can see, I don't see the knots. And then I move my thread up further in that same column before I cut the thread off, just so that there's a little more give and you're not cutting very close to the knot. So when you want to add a new thread in this, I would do it the same exact way, where I would go up in the direction of where I want to start working knot, and then start beading from there. I would be mindful of whether I want to go clockwise or counterclockwise, but other than that, that's how you add your next thread and keep going further. So I hope all of these techniques have been helpful to you. Here are some more ropes that I created and different patterns that I did in them with different colors. Continue watching the rest of our videos to know more about how to use color and how you can create different patterns and combinations using the different sizes of beads. We also have a fantastic lecture series headed by artist Catherine Shriver. I encourage you all to go watch the lecture series. It is very interesting. And we will also have some downloadable graphs that you can use to either create your own patterns or a library of patterns that we have created that you can follow in any colors of your choice. Have a fantastic International Bead Week. Happy beading!